The Elector, however, must needs leave them there for a time, having to depart forthwith to Poland, then almost in a state of anarchy. But, impatient for gold, he wrote Botter from Warsaw, urging him to communicate the secret, so that he himself might practice the art of commutation. The young goldcook, thus pressed, forwarded to Frederick a small phial molten state, into gold. This inserted, changed all metals, when in a molten state, into gold. This important phial was taken in charge by the Prince Fürst von Fürstenberg, who, accompanied by a regiment of guards, hurried with it to Warsaw. Arrived there, it was determined to make immediate trial of the process. The king and the prince locked themselves up in a secret chamber of the palace, girt themselves about with leather aprons, and like true gold cooks set to work melting copper in a crucible and afterwards applying to it the red fluid of Botter. But the result was unsatisfactory. For notwithstanding all that they could do, the copper obstinately remained copper. On referring to the alchemist's instructions, however, the king found that, to succeed with the process, it was necessary that the fluid should be used in great purity of heart. And as His Majesty was conscious of having spent the evening in very bad company, he attributed the failure of the experiment to that cause. A second trial was followed by no better results, and then the king became furious. For he had confessed and received absolution before beginning the second experiment. Frederick Augustus now resolved on forcing Botter to disclose the golden secret, as the only means of relief from his urgent pecuniary difficulties. The alchemist, hearing of the royal intention, again determined to fly. He succeeded in escaping his guard, and, after 3 days' travel, arrived at Enns in Austria, where he thought himself safe. The agents of the Elector were, however, at his heels. They had tracked him to the Golden Stag, which they surrounded, and seizing him in his bed, notwithstanding his resistance and appeals to the Austrian authorities for help, they carried him by force to Dresden. From this time he was more strictly watched than ever, and he was shortly after transferred to the strong fortress of Königstein. It was communicated to him that the royal exchequer was completely empty, and that 10 regiments of Poles in arrears of pay were waiting for his gold. The king himself visited him, and told him in a severe tone that if he did not at once proceed to make gold, he would be hung. Thumersrecht, Botter, sonst lass ich dich hängen. Years passed, and still Botter made no gold. But he was not hung. It was reserved for him to make a far more important discovery than the conversion of copper into gold, namely, the conversion of clay into porcelain. Some rare specimens of this ware had been brought by the Portuguese from China, which were sold for more than their weight in gold. Botter was first induced to turn his attention to the subject by Walter von Tschirnhaus, a maker of optical instruments, also an alchemist. Tschirnhaus was a man of education and distinction, and was held in much esteem by Prince Fürstenberg as well as by the Elector. He very sensibly said to Botter, still in fear of the gallows, "If you can't make gold, try and do something else. Make porcelain." The alchemist acted on the hint, and began his experiments, working night and day. He prosecuted his investigations for a long time with great assiduity, but without success. At length some red clay, brought to him for the purpose of making his crucibles, set him on the right track. He found that this clay, when submitted to a high temperature, became vitrified and retained its shape, and that its texture resembled that of porcelain, excepting in color and opacity. He had in fact accidentally discovered red porcelain, and he proceeded to manufacture it and sell it as porcelain. Botter was, however, well aware that the white color was an essential property of true porcelain, and he therefore prosecuted his experiments in the hope of discovering the secret. Several years thus passed, but without success, until again accident stood his friend, and helped him to a knowledge of the art of making white porcelain. One day, in the year 1707, he found his peruke unusually heavy, and asked of his valet the reason. The answer was, that it was owing to the powder with which the wig was dressed, which consisted of a kind of earth then much used for hair powder. Botter's quick imagination immediately seized upon the idea. This white earthy powder might possibly be the very earth of which he was in search. At all events, the opportunity must not be let slip of ascertaining what it really was. He was rewarded for his painstaking care and watchfulness. For he found, on experiment, that the principal ingredient of the hair powder consisted of kaolin, the want of which had so long formed an insuperable difficulty in the way of his inquiries. The discovery, in Botter's intelligent hands, led to great results, and proved of far greater importance than the discovery of the philosopher's stone would have been. In October 1707, he presented his first piece of porcelain to the Elector, who was greatly pleased with it. And it was resolved that Botter should be furnished with the means necessary for perfecting his invention. Having obtained a skilled workman from Delft, he began to turn porcelain with great success. He now entirely abandoned alchemy for pottery, and inscribed over the door of his workshop this distich, Es macht Gott, der Großschöpfer. Aus einem Goldmacher einen Töpfer. Botter, however, was still under strict surveillance, for fear lest he should communicate his secret to others or escape the Elector's control. The new workshops and furnaces which were erected for him, were guarded by troops night and day, and 6 superior officers were made responsible for the personal security of the potter. Botter's further experiments with his new furnaces proving very successful, and the porcelain which he manufactured being found to fetch large prices, it was next determined to establish a royal manufactory of porcelain. The manufacture of Delft ware was known to have greatly enriched Holland. Why should not the manufacture of porcelain equally enrich the Elector? Accordingly, a decree went forth, dated the 23rd of January, 1710, for the establishment of a large manufactory of porcelain at the Albrechtsberg in Meissen. In this decree, which was translated into Latin, French, and Dutch, and distributed by the ambassadors of the Elector at all the European courts, Frederick Augustus set forth that to promote the welfare of Saxony, which had suffered much through the Swedish invasion, he had directed his attention to the subterranean treasures and Unterirdischen Schatz of the country, and having employed some able persons in the investigation, they had succeeded in manufacturing a sort of red vessels, ein Art Gefäß, far superior to the Indian terra sigillata, as also colored ware and plates, Buntsgeschirr und Tafeln, which may be cut, ground, and polished, and are quite equal to Indian vessels, and finally that specimens of white porcelain, Proben von Weissem Porzellan, had already been obtained, and it was hoped that this quality, too, would soon be manufactured in considerable quantities. The royal decree concluded by inviting foreign artists and handicraftsmen to come to Saxony and engage as assistants in the new factory, at high wages, and under the patronage of the king. This royal edict probably gives the best account of the actual state of Botter's invention at the time.